Well, welcome guys to another episode of Guild Wars 2 Mysteries. Today, the mystery we're tackling is a fantastic topic from End of Dragons that I really don't want people to miss. It's actually one of my favourite moves that the story has pulled with End of Dragons, allowing the devs to have their cake and eat it too, and I'll explain what I mean by that very soon. Like my last Mysteries episode, I'm expecting this one to be a really big deal for future storylines, like Living World Season 6, or even beyond. So what am I talking about? Well, the Deep Sea Dragon. And I don't mean Su-1. So let's recap. For the past, 12 years of the franchise? Longer, maybe? We have known about a thing that we've been calling the Deep Sea Dragon. Even before we knew about Morgemoth, and we only thought that there were 5 Elder Dragons, one of those 5 was supposedly a Dragon of the Waters. The first descriptions we had of the Deep Sea Dragon appeared right there in the Movement of the World lore article. This was the original lore document describing the Elder Dragon threat and the entire setting of the sequel game after Guild Wars 1. In it, we get this passage. It says, after Primordus, the other great dragons began to stir one by one. The rise of the dragon beneath ore caused the entire continent to surface, sparking a tidal wave that swept the coastline and drowned thousands. They say in the deepest waters of the sea, another dragon breathed, twisting the waters themselves into tentacled horrors that rose from every lake and river of the land. That right there is some of the earliest Guild Wars 2 lore, and immediately we have a pretty good description of the Deep Sea Dragon. They kind of suggest the order there is that this thing wakes up after Zhaitan, but later in Season 2 we realise it's the reverse. And since this article, we've had numerous other references. We've heard about how the Crate and the Quaggan and the Karka had essentially been forced from their homes by events in the waters. They're kind of like dragon refugee species, a lot like the Asura, or like the Nornar, and while we hear that they've been displaced, we never really get the true details of why they've been displaced or what exactly happened there, just that they're scared and they're on the run. Much like Morgemoth, the hidden 6th dragon, a big thing with the story of the Deep Sea Dragon was that it's a mystery. You're not really supposed to know much about it. It's supposed to be somewhat intangible, and for as long as it remains intangible, unknowable, it can actually be really scary. If not for us as the players of the game, at least you can imagine the residents of Tyria being really scared when they're out on their ships and they look deep below themselves and feel that sense of dread and thalassophobia, unknown what the waters are hiding. Since Heart of Thorns came out and kind of dealt with all the Morgemoth stuff, the Deep Sea Dragon has been the ultimate mystery of the Elder Dragon Pantheon until now, sort of. So enter End of Dragons, and it's revealed that the Deep Sea Dragon is Su-1. And this is an Elder Dragon that woke up in the waters from the depths, yes, but this dragon, by the time of Zhaitan's awakening, is going to leave the waters completely at Kunavang's behest and save mainland Cantha, half of the city, from the tidal wave. This is an Elder Dragon who empathizes with mortals now, an Elder Dragon with no demonstrated minions of her own, and who's basically nice, which had been a fan theory for a long time, the fun idea that maybe the Canthans were collaborating with the dragon. There's a brilliant story to go down. There is one lore interview, I think from years ago, that kind of contradicts this being possible. But I'm really happy that End of Dragons did go for this story and gave us the friendly Elder Dragon vibe. So that's cool, but wait, if you stop to scrutinize all this then, you guys see the conflict with the previous lore. What did we just read about tentacles? I don't see anything tentacly about Su-1 and these displaced species. You might wonder if there's been a big retcon happening. And actually there hasn't. I've always felt that Guild Wars, for as long as it's gone on now, has been really excellent at not totally retconning stuff. Here the devs found a way to have their cake and eat it too. I got my first clue that there was a bigger story going on in New Kaineng, where I found Magister Ella McKay of the Dermond Priory looking out at that giant jade monument the Canthans had built to Su-1. Ella McKay is looking up at this great thing, at this representation of the fact that this is actually a friendly Elder Dragon these people like, and she says, that's ... that is impossible. I can't believe I was so wrong. And we say, everything okay, Magister? And she says, sorry, it's just, long before I studied Scarlet, I was studying the Crate, who they were, where they came from. But this statue being here, in this park, It contradicts so much of what I thought I knew. And we can say, well, what do you mean? She says, well, the Crate, like the Quaggan, like the Karka, and even some Lagos, they were all driven to our shores by something in the ocean, right? We know something was scaring them all away, pushing them out. Now, I want you guys to note that term scare there. You know, this idea of fear is still this big theme that the devs are going to keep playing with. And we can say, and that something was Su-Won. And she says, well, I mean, I'd always assumed, I hate to admit it, I assumed horror in the depths. It must be the dragon, right? It's always been dragons. But if Su-Won was in Cantha for the last 100 years, ... And we say, well, what does it mean? And she says, I don't know. All of that horror, fear again, doesn't line up with when the Elder Dragon awakened. It lines up with, well, it lines up with when it left. And we can say spooky, which again is kind of this fear thing again. So what is this conversation telling us? This conversation is pretty blatantly saying that there really is something out in the waters. There is a monster that's displacing these species, that is responsible for these tentacles, perhaps, that had been alluded to before, and that it's not Su-Won. That in fact Su-Won woke up, and when she left the waters, that this thing that's out there started acting freely and started terrorizing these societies. Su-Won, probably while she was there before the Zaitan wave, was using her influence and things like the blue orbs to keep this thing at bay, but when Kunavan convinced her to leave the Canthan mainland, well, it has free reign. And you actually see there's kind of some Superman story themes going on here. You know, you're this great powerful entity like Su-Won, and you want to defend the mortals now, but you can't defend them all. If you choose Cantha, then you're choosing not to help the people of the deep sea. Speaking of the blue orbs, this is another area of the lore that was expanded really well on this expansion. There's a whole text at the Ministry of Archives hypothesizing that, yeah, Su-Won had been using them to protect herself and maybe others from her other offspring throughout the other Elder Dragon cycles. And of course, at the area of the Springer Heart, we can find the blue orbs themselves. I guess what's mostly on my mind now is if the idea is there's lots of blue orbs still out there in the ocean protecting pocket areas from this monster we're hearing about, what happens now that Su-Won's gone? Is there a chance that these blue orbs might depower and the thing can start moving even more? Another hint appears in the main story itself, by the way. When you're at June's mansion, you can find a skeleton of some beastly sea monster that they pulled from the ocean. The plaque with it reads, saying, "A monstrosity from the endless ocean. Since Su-Won became guardian of Cantha, numerous horrors have been sighted in its depths. This particular specimen was captured outside the Yong reactor." I really love how much they're reinforcing this fear angle every time they talk about it, even here in End of Dragons. I think they did really well with making the Void super creepy and scary and dark, and the thought that they might do that on a whole other storyline now about this horrible, abominable creature is really fun to me. I know some of you guys are going to be wondering if the creature itself is Void connected and it's all one big same story. I actually think I dislike that. I like the idea that this is an area of the lore that kind of doesn't relate super closely to everything else we've been dealing with and continues to make Tyria feel big and expansive and filled with possibility. You've also got the simple fact that at the end of the main storyline, Aurene basically tells us she would know if the Void was able to do anything. Like, she basically says it's at bay now and we don't have to worry. So the idea there's some massive Void creature out in the oceans rampaging around and Aurene doesn't know about is a bit iffy to me. I don't think that this is Void. I just think, like Void, it's a pretty scary deal. Back to this fossil skeleton at June's mansion, I do wonder if that note about it getting pulled out of the waters near the Yong reactor is in any way of relevance. You could say, well, that's just how June got a hold of it, because she's around the reactor so much, so anything that happened there she'd see, and I think that makes sense. But I wonder if they're also suggesting that these creatures are the creatures of this deep sea monster are acting like Elder Dragon minions in a way. They're seeking out powerful sources of magic and maybe collecting it for their master, i.e. perhaps the reason that one of these minions is around the reactor is because Su-Won is there and there's so much magical stuff going on. Another interesting thing to recontextualize now that we have this whole other idea of a story is to go back to 2012 and look at the Crucible of Eternity. If you remember, this is a story about how the Inquest, and Kudu in particular it seems, throughout the original main storyline, were experimenting with combining Elder Dragon energies. And at the end of Crucible of Eternity story mode, you fight this great abomination. In retrospect, we're actually kind of looking at the Inquest bringing on the Void, maybe accidentally. And of course, the Thormanova reactor is related to this too. It's at the Crucible of Eternity we got our first hints about the 6th Elder Dragon, Morgemoth. The Inquest already knew about Morgemoth, long before the Pack Commander and all that. They had their Zone Green, and of course it was within the dungeon itself you got the name Morgemoth from one of Subject Alpha's attacks. This was a storyline and a hint I talked about way back in the earliest episodes of this Guild Wars 2 Mysteries series. But at this same place, the Crucible of Eternity, they had zones representing each of the dragons. Zone Green for Morgemoth, Zone Black I think it was for Zaitan, and then of course Zone Blue. Zone Blue was supposed to be the place for the Deep Sea Dragon experimentation and minion stuff, but it's empty when you go there. If you stand around in the area long enough, you can eavesdrop on some Inquest talking about how they do actually have a specimen that presumably they believe to be an Elder Dragon minion, some creation of the Deep Sea Dragon, and they call it a monster, but they say it's way too big to fit in the area. There's this whole big idea of like massive creatures were associated with the Deep Sea Dragon, and this thing was too big, so they'd have to rebuild the whole area to actually get Zone Blue up and running. So we ourselves don't actually see anything, but the Inquest have a specimen, and they believe it to be related to the Elder Dragons, except after End of Dragons now, we realise Su-1 never was responsible for that specimen. So what was it that the Inquest had, mistakenly believed to be related to Su-1, and in fact was probably related to this nasty, horrible thing out there in the depths? And so you'll see a recurring theme as this video's gone along. There's lots of oddly Elder Dragon-y things about this creature. The blue orbs were able to repel it just as they repelled other Elder Dragons. We found one near the Yong reactor, and there's a potential that they act a bit like Elder Dragon minions. And even the Inquest got confused about the true nature of one of these things. So what's that all about? Funnily enough, the guy who wrote the in-universe copy of The Movement of the World, he's a guy called Decimus the Historian, and in the past I think we've been able to find him at the Dermond Priory. He actually appears in End of Dragons. He's there at Arborstone. And on my first playthrough, I was really excited to speak to him because I wondered if maybe he'd have some clarity for us. In a weird way, he's one of the biggest authorities we have about this creature in the depths. It was he who wrote about these tentacles, which aside from the Jade Maw, we don't really see much anywhere. You know, we haven't seen what harassed the Quaggan and the Crate and so on. We've just heard this comment from him. I know some of you guys are probably thinking about it right now, so I will lay it out there that I think is a totally valid theory. Maybe the Jade Maw, or the Jade Maw species, is somewhat related to this monster. It has those big tentacles. Perhaps the one we find in the Jade Sea and the reflection from in the fractals is just some of these creatures that got frozen by the Jade, augmented by it somehow perhaps, and then released a little bit later. We also find images of krakens on drains all over New Kaineng, which I find really interesting, but they also appear at Lion's Arch, so I don't know whether there's some grand conspiracy there. I will note as well at the Yong reactor itself, when you first enter, what do we see in End of Dragons? A giant kraken octopus sculpture on display encircling the world's waters around that giant orb from the Order of Whispers, the Chantry of Secrets. So maybe the devs still want us to think about krakens, and maybe they still want us to think about this tentacly stuff. You see that right before the tour of the lab and all the information about Su-1 after all. I do find it funny how this Cthulhu-esque tentacled horror from the Deeps thing actually fits another Elder Dragon altogether a lot more, and that's Zaitan, who has the tentacle vibe, who woke up in the depths. Back to Decimus, he sadly doesn't have anything to say just yet, but who knows, maybe over Season 6, if Arborstone continues to be a hub of activity, and they continue updating these NPCs and adding new dialogue to them, perhaps in Season 6 or a current event style patch, we're going to get him talking on this. I'll leave you with one other big note and thing to look back on now that we have the fuller story, that this creature is still out there but not an Elder Dragon. And that's one of my favourite pieces of Guild Wars 2 concept art that we've ever seen. It popped up back around the release of Heart of Thorns. There's absolutely no suggestion they'll ever have to do something with this. But there is this art here of a giant Hydra surrounded by a tidal wave attacking the city of Lion's Arch. You might look at the story of End of Dragons and say, well, Su-1 is just a friendly elder dragon, none of these stories are viable anymore, but look under the surface and you'll realize they totally still could come true. And I guess that's the question. Is this thing still out there, lurking in the unending ocean, possibly around the Battle Isles? Could there be a Lagos team-up storyline on its way as the blue orbs begin to falter? Who knows? That's the mystery, guys. And it's funny because in a lot of ways, this isn't a new mystery. It's just that now when we talk about the deep sea dragon, the DSD, instead, we should be talking about the DSM, the deep sea monster or the deep sea creature, the thing in the depths. And another funny thing too, we're back to a position of not knowing anything about this thing, not even its name, not even the first letter of its name, as we had S for Su-1 ever since Season 2. I kind of really like that. There are all kinds of fun ways they could go with this. Discussing the organic creation of super predators on Tyria that end up acting like elder dragons without explicitly being made by Su-1, I think is a really fun idea. They could look at this as some kind of abomination prototype elder dragon experiment that Su-1 had made before the other dragons. Perhaps Su-1 had tried to create an elder dragon to take water from her, but failed, and that's why she decided to do it for herself, and this thing's still out there. Though I admit, if that theory's true, it's a bit weird she's never said anything to us about it during the storyline of End of Dragons. Perhaps there were more pressing things on her mind. They could talk about this as a creature from the mists that's just found its way into our reality, and now it's hiding in the black depths of the ocean. Or perhaps this is a mist entity much like Su-1 herself, possibly even related to her, and it's created its own Elder Dragon type thing that's out there. Though it did seem that Su-1 existed maybe on a higher power level than it. She could at least sort of repress it and keep it at bay as long as she too was in the waters. There you have it, guys. Let me know what you think about the deep sea creature. Of course, the expansion's quite new now. I've gone over what I can, and I've had some conversations about this with the community to try and get the biggest hints. If you guys think you've seen any other interesting insights about this guy, please do let me know. And I will see you all very soon for another Guild Wars Mysteries 2 about Raisu Palace and even more freaky, cool, hidden stuff. I'll tell you, this expansion was very, very good for these kinds of things. We've got the Wardens to look at. So as long as you guys are enjoying these videos, I would love to keep going with it. Hopefully reignite some passion and some excitement in you all for all the fun things that Tyria might do in the future. Please do tell people about this story so that everyone's in the know, because I think so many people have played the expansion, they don't see this stuff, just as they might not be thinking about the Zunrao thing from the previous Guild Wars Mysteries I did as well. So check that out if you missed it. Thanks very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the comments. Oh, and as an added reason to watch the Zunrao video, you can click it literally in the background there. That one's probably going to be somewhat like parallel to the next part as well, to do with Raisu Palace. See you guys there.